Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wisdom Seeker Live. Glad to have you this morning. Please remind you to let us know where you're joining from, if you would, so that we can recognize you and look forward to hearing from you with comments, questions, and so look forward to it. Excuse me. And as always, like to remind everyone of how we see wisdom on Wisdom Seeker Live. Wisdom is a journey that we're all embarked on, and or hopefully are. At a minimum, we are generally going to gain knowledge, and knowledge is something we can pick up just by observation or by intentional effort, so on and so forth. And next step in this wisdom process is to gain understanding, or in other words, experience. And that's when we take the knowledge, the facts and figures, information that we gain from various sources, and we begin to use it, apply it, and make application in our lives to solve problems, or to learn other things, to use it for work, whatever. And then the, excuse me, and the last and the most important step that we have is going from knowledge and understanding to wisdom. And the key there is that wisdom is a different perspective. It's taking our knowledge and understanding and begin to see it and use it in light of a much bigger picture, much more outside of ourselves, and viewing things in a way that we understand that what we do, who we are, what we see, what we know, even, is not just about us, that it affects others around us and factors into the world around us, and so on. So that's about the wisdom journey. And we take that hopefully and spend time seeking and gaining the wisdom, seeking that bigger perspective. And for those of us that are of a spiritual bent, the way we like to put it is we begin to see things through God's eyes. And that's such a key part that too many miss, because they stop with knowledge or even experience. So that's about Wisdom Journey. Good to see everyone this morning. Sharon and Rick, Suzette, Eunice, glad to have y'all this morning. So the topic today is a bit of a challenging one. It is about family relationships. And I think part of what sparked this is, for me anyway, is coming from Mother's Day celebration yesterday from around the world. Everyone apparently, or most of the world, celebrates Mother's Day, and that's a great thing, because we owe a lot to mothers, and recognizing them and appreciate them is just such a important part. Welcome, Ed Mario. Glad to have you this morning as well. And so wanted to let's talk about that. You know, a lot of relationships that we have can come and go. And of course, there's impact as those come and go. But one relationship that we generally have for most of our life is with our family. And I think that a lot of people struggle in those relationships. In fact, I did a recent poll in regards to this when I announced the topic. And the question is, do you have family relationships that you need wisdom in regards to? And right now it's about 50-50 in regards to those that say they need some wisdom in those relationships, and those that don't. My hope and prayer is those that don't need any wisdom in those relationships is because they're healthy and strong and not because they have ceased to have those relationships, even though I know that that happens as well. Welcome, Shona. Glad to have you here today as well. So we'll open up with a comment from Eunice. Eunice makes the comment: you must read to your children, you must hug your children, and you must love your children. Your success as a family, our success as a society, depends not on what happens in the White House, but what happens inside your house. That's a quote from Barbara Bush. Indeed, that is truism, and part of what we don't consider sometimes is that family relationships, if depending on how the culture tends, can really make or break our culture as we know it, because by design, the family is the core of what we do as a culture. That those relationships are vital to the success and well-being of a culture. And it also plays into our health and well-being as well. And kind of tied into this topic is the fact that May is Mental Health Month, and Anton and I plan on talking about that tomorrow on the Human SOS show. So today, family relationships. I'd love to hear some of the challenges that you're facing in your relationship, so that we can learn together, seek wisdom together, and talk through this and find out some ways to help us in having wisdom in these relationships. And of course, I'm basing this whole topic on the principle that family relationships are important and that they are worth fighting for, if you will, or making the effort to cause them to be healthy. And that we need these relationships for our well-being, as well as the well-being of our cultures. Because as the quote that Eunice shared says, and by observation, been around the globe, around the world a time or two at this point, been around a while. And the observation is that how family relationships go will determine the health of our world, our culture. And it seems to me that we have grown more challenged in where we are in those family relationships. I see many more relationships that are broken as family, to a point that they are can appear to be irreparable, and that there is no relationship. So again, I just want to point out the value of family relationships. And even if we try to ignore them, we're not going to be successful in doing so, because not only morally and by design, but even legally, we have connections with family, and it can affect us as we have family get ill and or pass away and so on. And it factors in a big way. And so let's see. And Mario has a comment. Says the responsibility that a person takes upon himself when he accepts the leadership position is very big and more complex than it seems, due to the fact that you are a human being endowed with feelings and emotions, and you relate to other human beings in the same way. True statement. And those relationships, those emotions especially factor and we're affected by the family, again, because of the design of our relationship to the family. And Rick makes a comment, and this is something certainly a challenge that we face in especially in families, because just because you grow up with someone and share the same parents doesn't necessarily mean that you can readily discuss any and everything. and especially politics and religion, because those are points of challenge and disagreement. And I have to add that in our current circumstances with the COVID pandemic, that's added a whole new um, factor, and I would say has come to a point of being on the same scale of challenge to discuss as politics and religion, because of the different approaches, different perspective that we've taken among our families. It has become a divisive issue as well. So, one of the things that we need to note, and I'll give some background on this, but in current situations, our relationships have seasons within our family. We have the season of child to parent, and then as the child grows, child becomes an adult. And so then our relationship to our parents changes in dynamic and becomes different, how we approach it, and so on. And then as the everyone matures or ages, then those relationships change to a point that later seasons in life in a family relationship, in some ways, we switch roles in that the children become the leader or adult in the relationships because of mental health challenges as we age, and can happen to any of us. And so we have to remember that there are seasons and times for those relationships. And what I suggest, and this is where we are culturally have reached a real problem in our family, is that the priority of family, especially the nuclear family, has diminished. Used to be that early on in a child's life, that parents' priority was to spend time raising their children, teaching them how to mature, grow, learn, and develop character. And then as they grew and matured, that we gave them opportunity, even put them in opportunities to find out what they have learned and grown. Welcome, Leslie. Welcome, Mary. Glad to have you all this morning. And so early on, family relationships are primarily affected, and the foundation laid when our children are young, and how we relate to our children. And some of the challenges that we face there is that we have parents that maybe don't prioritize their children, in that they are more concerned with providing them with things and money and so on, rather than relationship. And as a result, the type of relationships that develop become superficial, and they are based on circumstances and so on. And as a result, also some of the character building process, some of the development of children into young men and young women is stunted as a result. And just so you'll know, it's been a lot of discussion over the years of quality versus quantity time between parents and children. And what I suggest is that it's not one or the other, it's both. You can have quality time with less of it, but it's hard to have quality time without quantity time as well. Welcome, Brett. Glad to have you with us, and look forward to having Brett on the show in a few weeks. So good to have you this morning, Brett. Thank you. And so these relationships start and develop early on. And another pitfall that I've observed, both as a parent and then as a former teacher. You get some interesting perspective on family relationships. But one of the challenges that I see in family relationships is parents that try to control their children's lives and try to get them to, we say we don't want them to make the same mistakes we did. The problem is too often we shelter the kids rather than allowing them to learn in the process of growing. And also, this one's hard, is that our children are not exactly like us. And we have to give them room to grow into their unique design that they have by God, our Creator, and let them learn what they need to, including, and this is a hard one, is to let them make their own mistakes. And so, challenges we face in those relationships is early on to, rather than relive our lives through our children or to supposedly protect them from our mistakes, we should rather seek forgiveness of our mistakes and grow and learn from our own mistakes, but don't try to push your children into your mold, but rather help mold them based on their design. And comment from Leslie. Yes, indeed, Leslie, that balance is important. Finding and looking for that balance all the time is a challenge in family relationships, because part of family relationships is expectations that we spend time with family, especially at holidays and things like that. But how do we do it and maintain relationship because of the challenges? And Suzette shares a comment. She says, vulnerability is a character trait needed by leaders. I think too much the role of a leader is reduced to non-feeling attributes in the household and outside the household. The unfortunate thing is that the statue of leadership within corporate severely alters household leadership and family dynamics. There is definitely an interaction between leadership and our family leadership and our work and those relationships, and they factor into each other. And that's why one of the things, and Leslie commented about balance, and one of the things I think we deal with that is a myth in our culture is work-life balance. First of all, work is not life. It is a subset of life, and therefore should not hold its own placeholder, if you will, although I know we have to work and I know it takes time. And just for the record, though, it doesn't take the majority of our time, or if it does, something is remarkably potentially out of balance. Welcome, Atif. Glad to have you with us. And so rather than work-life balance, I like to think of congruence, and that is that work and life, along with other aspects of life, have to function together in a way that's healthy. And just like we talked about seasons of family relationships, those are part of seasons of life. And the idea is that early on, the early seasons of our life, family life, especially with children, should be focused on prioritizing those children and raising them, teaching them, training them up in the right way, teaching them character and how to work with other people and how to survive, as well as prepare them for future, as far as considering work and career and education and lots of things. And those should be that season should be prioritized with families that center around growth and raising children. Welcome, Zaid. Glad to have you with us. And then as the children grow and our relationship or our interaction changes, then we need to consider how we adjust and move forward with that. But the key thing, though, is that, like we started with, that these family relationships are important and should be maintained and prioritized, because it is how the family relationships go in a culture that will ultimately determine the health and success of that culture. And what we have allowed is that family has broken down, and those relationships are now almost disposable because of that. We do not prioritize these family relationships. And so the solution too often now is, well, I don't like this family member, so I'm just going to cut them off. I'm going to ignore them. And that's certainly has to be an option considered, but it should be the ultimate last resort when everything else is tried, including getting therapy, getting counseling, whatever, to help maintain those relationships. And so, again, priority, that family relationships are worth fighting for to maintain, key part. So as our relationships grow, our children age and get to a point where they become young adults and adults and move out on their own, then our relationship changes. And being ready to grow with that and move with that as parents and as children become important. And what's interesting is the extremes that I see in these relationships, to a point that one extreme I see is that parents never let go of their children. They never release them to be adults emotionally, mentally, and sometimes even physically, to the point that we have children residing in the homes with their parents for years and years, which is uh, generally speaking not a healthy situation, especially unless there is mitigating circumstances, need for help, health care, and so on. But these family relationships will go through seasons, and we need to be prepared to work with those seasons in our relationships. So as we progress along in family relationships and dynamic, and our children become adults, then we have to look at ways to support them, love them, and let go. And that's a hard one, because we have some parents that are insistent on holding on to their children in terms of relationship, to a point that they continue into adulthood of their children, trying to protect their children. And that's admirable, and I appreciate that. And I am more protective of my family and even friends than many are. So I appreciate the challenge of that. But there's a point where the wise thing for us to do is to let go of our children. That doesn't mean stop loving them or relating to them. It means in terms of taking responsibility for them, allowing them to grow into who they are created to be, and support them in that, rather than trying to keep them from making any mistakes, or avoiding the mistakes that we think we made, and so on, and trying to live our lives through them even into adulthood. And that's become another challenge in family relationships that are uh, that we need to address and overcome. Leslie makes a comment. It's important to allow children to learn and explore their interests. Some are expected to follow in their parents' footsteps. Children need permission and acceptance as they spread their wings. Without a doubt, Leslie, and unfortunately, our current culture doesn't get that. And I have an opinion on it. I know y'all find it hard to believe that I might have an opinion, but I think the reason that we have parents that don't let go of their children to allow them to mature and go into adulthood is based in guilt, and the guilt of not spending time and investing in our children young. And as a result, we feel like we've got to keep somehow protecting or making provision for them, and that's not a healthy thing. Now, of course, you have to consider, if you're allowing your children to make their own mistakes, you, if possible, want to try to avoid fatal mistakes. But even then, there are times where by protecting our children from their consequences and their choices, that we harm them in the process. And this, what Leslie was talking about, this move towards independence is a key factor, and learning to adjust our relationship based on the different seasons in life with our children and with our parents. And learning how to relate in those different seasons becomes very valuable. And as I've watched and observed, now, for those of you who don't know, I have 5 children and 5 grandchildren, so I'm speak from experience. And I also, unfortunately, have been through divorce in my life. So now we have some of the interesting dynamics of mixed families, if you will, combined families, and those challenges, and being mindful of those relationships and those circumstances add a dimension to family relationships that creates their own set of challenges. Working with extended family or step families and so on, and something that we really have to be aware of. And but one of the biggest things in our culture today is not letting go of or not allowing our children to grow and move and learn, and including, this is such a key, we want to think that let children be children has been a big mantra. Well, the problem is that most of our life is not being a child, and most of our life is not about remaining a child. And some parents seem to think that magically at a certain age, all of a sudden their children become adults, and it doesn't work that way. It's a process that we as parents are embarking on, starting from the day they're born, to build them towards maturity as adults. Doesn't mean that they can't have fun as children or any of that. I'm not talking about taking away fun and enjoyment. That's not the point. But we've got a lot of families that are so focused on keeping their children, and they assume that all of a sudden when they turn legal age, that magically they're adults. And we don't prepare them for adulthood. And that's why we've got adult age children that aren't prepared, trying to be adults without the skill sets and practice to do so. And Rick makes a comment and ties right in. This says, our children need to learn from their miscues as we did and still are. Indeed, Rick, unfortunately, in many of our cultures, and I know the United States is especially true of this, is that we spend so much time trying to protect our children from the consequences of their choices, that when it comes time that we can no longer protect them, then we end up with adults, young adults that are mentally and emotionally damaged because we've not allowed them in the protective environment of still being at home to be able to learn from the consequences related to their choices. And so these all factor into the relationships we have because, just as kind of a recap, that our relationships and families are something that we go through seasons, and that we should not try to prevent one season or another, but rather prepare for and move through the different seasons, starting parents being totally responsible for their children up to a point. And we're talking morally, we're talking ethically, and in many cases, legally being responsible for our children up to a point. But there is a point where we begin to have to let them go. And we have to allow them to find their place, if you will, to find their unique design. And part of that process, as Rick comments, is allowing them to have those miscues, those mistakes, and feel the consequences of their choices. And the more we shield them from that, the longer it will take them to mature and grow and develop character. And ultimately, what this show is about wisdom. And we should start early in the lives of our children to help them seek and gain wisdom. And part of that is allowing them to make their own mistakes, because I believe that most anyone that has gained wisdom along the way and purposeful about it will readily acknowledge that some of the greatest learning and growth we ever experience is from making our own mistakes and doing things that we have to feel the consequences for. And, one of the things that we as parents, and I have to think about it in terms of being grandparent, that we have to consider is that even what we have learned as far as a specific response or a specific way to deal with something does not apply to our children and grandchildren completely. We can share the principles. We should share the principles and take time to even explain them, but don't tell our children how to respond in every situation, because they are different. They are their own creation from God. And we have to allow them to learn how to respond based on who they are, who they're designed to be, and who they ultimately will grow into. And again, that's a challenge, because we sometimes feel like that we owe them something. Usually, again, it's based in guilt between not spending time with our children when they're young and investing in them with our time, our love. And then you add into the mix broken families and the guilt that goes with that. We make a lot of parenting decisions based on guilt rather than on wisdom. And so the goal, like I said, is that we start early on to teach our children how to begin to seek out wisdom. And one of those ways is to allow them to fail, allow them to make their mistakes. Again, try to avoid the mistakes, the things that could be deadly or fatal. But most of the time, that's not the case. That's not the case at all. It's more of us trying to protect and give them the perfect life. And by the way, been around a long time, and the perfect life doesn't exist, just so you'll know, neither physically nor mentally and emotionally. That it doesn't exist. And for us to think that somehow we're going to help them find the perfect life is an error and unwise way to approach in family relationships and raising children. And what happens is that ultimately it can have negative effects in those relationships. Let's see. uh, Leslie has a question. Will you address parents choosing the children's life studies rather than giving them the freedom to pursue their interests? I'll be happy to, Leslie. At the end of the day, it's a big problem. Our goal as parents should be to train up or teach our children in the core values or principles of life, not how to live. It is to build within them through our choices, or and even we put them in situations to learn, or we allow them to go into situations where they learn. But ultimately, we need to let them learn and grow, other than, again, there's a core set of principles and values that we need to instill into our children, such as loving others, loving themselves. And I have to say, and I know this may upset some people, I don't mean to be offensive, but loving God and teaching those core values to our children, so that that gives them a foundation to then that we can be comfortable and confident to let go of them to grow and learn in who they are designed to be. Now, again, I recognize that our children are products of their parents, and that factors in, and certainly we need to recognize it. In fact, one of the best things as a parent that we can do to have healthy relationships is to accept our own mistakes, seek forgiveness, give forgiveness in those terms, and to own up to our mistakes with our children, and to let them know, we did this, and as the consequence of doing this was good or bad, and share that with them, not to the point of protecting them from making their own choices and finding the consequences, but to help them gain some wisdom from our learning. And part of the value of the show that I hope people take away is that there are times where all of us can pick up wisdom from other people without having to learn it the hard way. I know we joke in our family, we don't seem to do anything learning wise without doing it the hard way, but it doesn't have to be that way. But we do have to learn. We can't just protect our children and all to a point that they don't learn from their choices. Let's see. Thanks for stopping by, Suzette. I appreciate our schedules sometimes make it a challenge. So thanks for being here while you could. So let's see. Rick makes a comment. I think we had struggles in our youth and then become overprotective with our children. You're correct. And I will tell you a cultural understanding that I've come to that factors into this, and so I hope I'm not getting too nerdy on you here, but it's something we need to truly learn from. Is that we had a generation that went through in the U.S. the Great Depression, where things really got hard for us culturally, to a point that people did not know from day to day if they were even going to have food or a place to live. And so challenged down to the very core of being able to exist. And that created a mantra, if you will, with the generation that went through that time, is that I'm going to do everything possible so that my children do not have to go through what I went through. And and I get that. I mean, I'm not big on expectations that we deserve to have house and 2 cars and all that. It's nice, and don't see it as a moral problem. But the reality is, what we are reasonable to expect in general is to have food, have clothing, and shelter of some kind. Doesn't necessarily, contrary to people's belief, doesn't mean we've got to own a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in the suburbs. It means a place to shelter and stay out of the elements in order to rest. So anyway, this generation went through a time where those very things were in question, not sure about just the most basic sustenance of life. So the mantra became, I want it better for my children than I had it. And so that generation made choices to try to ensure that not only their children had the basic necessities such as food, clothing, and shelter, and to a point that we said we want it better. So we want beyond food, shelter, and clothing. But at that point, again, the expectation was not one of additional things, if you will, but more the assurance that they could have some level of, I guess, reliability to have those basic things. The problem is that the generation after the generation that went through the Depression continued with the same mantra. I want my children to have things better than I had it. And the primary focus of this, by the way, was of a physical nature. It was not focused in on mental, emotional, spiritual. It was about physical needs, food, clothing, and shelter. And so as a result, with each following generation, we built a higher expectation in terms of physical things and having physical things, and which became a part of status as well. And to a point that we set culturally an expectation of what is required to have life and to sustain it. And in the process, we forgot about the mental, emotional, spiritual well-being as part of it, and our priorities got shifted. And so it's a challenge that we have to watch for. I know that one of the things in my family that we did with our children, it was hard because of where we lived and struggling with some guilt over life situations, but we chose not to make maturity and success and everything about physical possessions and physical well-being, although our goal was to make sure that our children had food, clothing, and shelter, but it was not the priority to build a better life based on things. And as a result, we were able to continue to focus in on helping our children develop character, mental, emotional well-being, and so on. And so I think that's another part that has factored into the world and our culture that we currently live in. And also it affects these relationships. And welcome, Marius. I apologize. I saw your name earlier and got so caught up in the conversation that I didn't reach out, but welcome. Glad to have you. So we have to really consider, as we work with children, our children, and how our parents worked with us become a very big factor in relationships the rest of our life. And one of the things that I see is that because of the focus on material comfort and protecting our children a great deal as a culture, is, and this is going to, in one regard, sound a little bit peculiar, but rather than us protecting them and providing them with so many things, rather than it creating a relationship of gratitude and interaction, welcome, Jeremy, glad to have you. It actually quite often either creates resentment because our children by design are to grow and learn and develop themselves. And when we overprotect them, we are causing them conflict based on just sheer design as people. The other is that, and this is an issue that we're facing, is over dependence on parents by children. Not being able to launch and become independent and to develop character and wisdom where they can grow into what they're designed to and what they are meant to do and be. And so some challenges there that affect our current relationships. Marius makes a comment, our assignment from God is to show our children the fear of the Lord and love for others. That is it in the core. Yes, Marius, definitely. And it's an important thing. Leslie makes a comment. I'm referring the freedom to choose a different course of study in college. That is a big one. In fact, what is concerning is that it needs to be even more basic than that, is a choice whether to go to college. We have in our culture built institutional, formal academic education to such a level that we as parents make a grave error assuming that our children should all go to college, period, by default answer. And don't have time, and this is not the priority of the show today, but I can provide you with evidence that tells us that that's not only not true, but that mindset is harmful to our children. Again, another discussion for another day. And so we do need to give our children one of the core principles that our Creator has given us is free will. And what we as parents, in order to have healthy relationships with our children, again, by design, is to be sure to give them or respect their free will also. Now, what another challenge I see us facing, again, that factors into later relationships, is that we start too young with children, giving children absolute free will without providing the principles and character that they need to make those choices. And again, part of the challenge that we face is when and how we begin to allow them to take on that free will. And there's no magic age. We've tried so hard to, by this age, everybody should be doing this. And by this age, they should be doing that, and so on. We are not that homogenous in our design. And as a culture, the fact that we're trying to make decisions based on somebody's accomplishment as a child at a certain age, being able to do this, some of the big ones that we see out there is the, around academic achievement. Well, by the age of X, they should be reading and writing. And by the age of X, they should be able to know all of this or that. And it's damaging our children. And in my estimation, some of all of this is damaging our relationship with our children. Because the goal, again, is that we are in a role of leadership. And I know some people are really going to bristle at this one, but our role and relationship to our children early on is in that relationship of authority. and a high level of responsibility for our children. And we have began to, first of all, we've thrown authority out as a culture, and then we've shirked responsibility as parents, and and not allowing our children to grow into responsibility. So what we have to do is early on in their development is the time that we take full responsibility for our children, their behavior, their form, and so on, not to build them into us, a carbon copy of us. That's foolish. It is to help them find who God's created them to be, find God's character in themselves, and develop as He wants them to develop, which may be in some cases, and this is what can be real hard for us as parents, is they may be completely different than what we are. And that sometimes for some parents is a hard pill to swallow. They think that they should just be a repeat of us, and we see that even with naming, junior and the third and the fourth and so on. Again, not picking on naming constructs and interest in having our name carried on in that fashion, but rather the implications of it. Let's see. Let's see here. That builds fear of not being accepted if we have different interests and paths. I assume you're talking about difference between children and parents, Leslie. And I agree that we have to accept those differences and and instill in our children values. See, boy, this takes so many different potential turns that we may have to consider another episode. But the other thing that we should be doing as parents in the early relationship with our children is to help them understand that regardless of what they do, say, how they behave, any of that they have intrinsic value given to them by our Creator, just like we do, and that value is not affected by anything else, and that is the foundation that we need to build in our children. And that doesn't mean that we tell them they're perfect and never need to change. That means we help them understand that God created them just like God created us, with value to a point of love, unconditional, and of such great character. And building that into our children is how we allow them to have the strength. And in fact, it's one way that we go a long way towards bully proofing our children. Because if we are completely confident and comfortable in who we are and our value that has been given us, then people attacking our value, threatening our value with words or whatever, bullying us, have no effect. And most times when bullies have no effect on you in terms of response, they get over it and go on. So relationships as family, we've got to have those relationships, and the healthier they are, the better we are, both as a family and culturally. And as we go through, we have to really be sure to value those relationships. And that means at times, and this is going to sound strange, but there's going to be times that we have to commit and make a choice to love our family and be committed to our family, even sometimes when we don't like them. And I say don't like them What we don't like is their actions or their attitudes that sometimes they have, and we all do that. I know sometimes I have a sorry attitude or make us do dumb things behaviorally, and I have to recognize that and give the same grace to others that I hope for in my errors and in my mistakes. And so we really have to be committed to these relationships. And that's just such a key factor that we need to consider, and that it is worth fighting for these relationships in our families. And I know for me, it's an interesting season in life and this is, I'm being very transparent here. I love my mom dearly, and we, we have a pretty strong relationship, but we face our challenges as well. And but I value the relationship, but and make choices to maintain it as strong as possible. And the dynamic of the relationship right now for us is changing because my mom is getting older and getting to a point of life where age takes its toll and how it affects relationships. And it's not easy working through those, but the key, and this is important, is to maintain the principles involved at the core of family and family relationships, to the point that we don't allow circumstances to tear up those relationships without a great deal of effort to maintain them and learn how to work through them. Now, I do have to say, I know that there are times where we face having to consider in very unhealthy family relationships, moving away from them, at least for a time. And that is certainly a very hard decision to make, and should be done as a very, very last resort. Most of the time, we need to make sure that we fight hard against ourselves and to maintain those family relationships. And by the way, we like to avoid regrets. Some of the biggest regrets we have in life are about our family relationships. And so making it a priority and avoiding those regrets is certainly a key factor. Welcome, Mandar. Glad to have you with us today. So family relationships and wisdom related to it. Some key points, in my opinion, we should walk away with. First of all, those relationships are worth effort and sacrifice to maintain, and they will involve sacrifice, no doubt about it, and sometimes even more so than other relationships. Second of all, the wisdom to take away is, as a culture, the more we value family relationships and strive to maintain those relationships, the healthier we're going to be as a culture, and the healthier we're going to be individually. It's just so key to realize that. And then ultimately, one of the things that we need to consider is, as we look at family relationships, that as much as we share commonality and similarities, including genetic tendencies that we share, that we are each unique and individually designed by our Creator, and our value is in pursuing that and living that, rather than being exactly like our parents or completely different than our parents. And if we get focused on either of those extremes, we're likely to be unhealthy. And one in particular thing is, if you ever say, I'll never be like my parents, you're guaranteeing that either in action and or in attitude, you're going to be exactly like your parents. So if you really want to curse yourself in that regard, make that proclamation, and it will bite you squarely in the backside because you are setting up an emotional focus. So, wow, we're run out of time. I'm thinking we may need to revisit. I'll depend on input from you guys. Welcome, Wendy. Glad that even though you're late, that you were able to at least join for the tail end. And so look forward to growing together, gaining some wisdom together, hopefully today, and that we will value our family relationships to a point that we're willing to sacrifice and fight for them, because if we don't, we will be unhealthy and we will lose a lot of the value in life and set ourselves up for a lot of regrets. So thank you, everyone, for being here. And we're going to have a special guest next week. I'll get that announcement out, and appreciate you being here today, sharing your thoughts. I know I learn from you guys every time we're together, and we can grow and seek wisdom together. So God bless you for a great week. Hope that you find great wisdom as we go along. And thank you for being here. God bless. And we'll see you next Monday, 8 o'clock Eastern, for the Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. Take care.